What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 23 of the Chat It Up podcast. I'm your host, Shooter, and as always, I'm here with news, interviews, and reviews about all things Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If this is your first time listening in, welcome. I hope you enjoy it. And for all you return listeners, as I say week in and week out, thank you for sticking with me, and thank you for tuning in. We've got a really great episode this week. We're going to do segments first, so I've got Yooper News, followed by This Day in Yooper History, and then we'll get into this week's interview. But before that, just a little bit of housekeeping, and that housekeeping is strictly just however you're listening in, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Stitcher, or even if you're listening on the Buzzsprout page for the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and leave me a review. That's how other people find out about the podcast. That's how it grows. So please subscribe, rate, leave me a review, and please spread the word too by word of mouth. Let people know about the podcast, anybody you think that might like it. But all that being said, let's just jump into things here. So we'll start with Yooper News. And to start off, actually, I have some sad Yooper news. I found out this morning that Mr. Rex Terwilliger passed away. Now, Rex was well known all across the Upper Peninsula in the sports world. He was a coach of many different high school sports for nearly 7 decades, and it's a shame that he passed away. He was a part of the UP Sports Hall of Fame and also the NMU Sports Hall of Fame, and just a really, really great guy. Kind of a cool story. He was my dad's varsity football coach in high school in the 1960s. And then in the early 2000s, he was an assistant coach for my dad's football team up at North Dickinson. And I can just remember him coming by on the weekends at like 7 in the morning and like knocking on the door and waking all of us up. And he would have notes on scraps of paper and napkins of football play ideas and defensive schemes and all of this different stuff that he just couldn't wait to tell my dad about. And I just remember being totally in awe of this guy who at the time was in, I believe, his mid-60s, just still so very, very passionate about sports and the game of football. And, really, especially up at NMU, he was a legend. He was a part of the Barracks Boys, which was a scholarship program in the, early 50s up at Northern. And it was 16 guys that essentially lived in these abandoned barracks that were on campus that had been there from World War II with, soldiers that were there for the GI Bill that had been using these barracks. And these 16 guys essentially signed this agreement to follow strict rules. They split all the bills for running these barracks. And I believe they paid the college $1 per month for rent. And they had to participate in at least 2 sports, whether it be football, basketball, track and field, tennis, or golf. And Rex was one of these guys. So really kind of a cool part of Northern Michigan's history. And as I mentioned, he was a part of the UP Sports Hall of Fame and the NMU Sports Hall of Fame. And, the word legend gets thrown around pretty loosely these days. But as far as UP sports goes, Rex truly was a legend, and he will be greatly missed. So rest in peace to Rex. We'll definitely miss you. But in other Yooper news, I've got 2 stories coming out of Michigan Tech, which are really, really cool. The first article that I read is that researchers at Michigan Tech are looking at repurposing all of the old abandoned mines. I mean, if you look around the UP, especially the western half of the UP, there are abandoned mines all over the place. And they're just sitting there collecting dust, and really at the end of the day, they're a hazard. But what these researchers at Michigan Tech are looking at using them for is as a place to hold stored energy. Obviously, you see all over in the news right now a big focus on getting away from fossil fuels and looking at more renewable energy sources and storing that renewed energy source. And one of the biggest is pumped hydroelectric storage. So these researchers at Michigan Tech are looking at the theory of, what if we put these hydroelectric storage facilities in these old abandoned mines? because these storage facilities are pretty unsightly and they're intrusive into people's communities. So if they can put them underground, then you don't have to look at them, number one. But number two, it could really help the economy of a lot of these communities around the UP, because if these facilities get put in, that's going to bring jobs because people are going to have to run the facilities. So, and it could also lower electricity costs also, is what I read in the article. So I just think it's cool that they're trying to find a purpose for these mines that's not just tied into the tourism industry. So I'll be really kind of curious to see what comes of all of this research that they're doing. The other article that I was reading from up at Michigan Tech was students and faculty have been using what's called a Gigabot 3D printer, and they've been making outdoor sports items like kayak paddles, snowshoes, and skateboards. But what they're using is they're actually using regular plastic, like recycled plastic materials. This 3D printer can essentially take anything that has the triangle recycle symbol on it that's made out of plastic, and it converts it into a 3D printed polymer that they can make products out of. Again, that kind of goes back to being green and reusing stuff. I just think it's awesome that you can put pretty much any recyclable plastic in it and repurpose it and make it into something that someone can get use out of. So a huge shout out to Michigan Tech, all of you Huskies out there that are listening into the podcast. Pretty cool stuff that you guys are doing on the cutting edge here of being green. So shout out to you guys. All right, let's roll into our next segment here, which is This Day in Yooper History, which will be Monday, April 29th, and that's brought to you by the folks at the Pasty Central Facebook page and the pasty.com website. So again, that's pasty.com and the Pasty Central Facebook page. So here it is, This Day in Yooper History.
Pasty Central Day in History, April 29th. On this day in 1911, the Great Lakes State adopted a new flag, Michigan's third since becoming a state in 1837. It features a coat of arms showing an eagle holding an olive branch and arrows. An elk and a moose support a shield displaying a man standing on a grassy peninsula. The design features three Latin mottos, meaning respectively, out of many, one, I will defend, and if you seek a pleasant peninsula, look about you, the official state motto. Finally, on this day in 1959, John Lapo, an Air Force pilot from Muskegon, flew a B-47 bomber under the Mackinac Bridge at 425 miles an hour. The daredevil stunt went unreported at the time, but when the Air Force learned about it, Lapo lost his wings. Pasty Central Day in History, April 29th.
Okay, thanks again to the folks over at pasty.com and the Pasty Central Facebook page for bringing us This Day in Yooper History. All right, it's time for the interview this week with my good friends Kyle and Megan Blomquist. They are both architects in the city of Iron Mountain, but they also are doing a lot of awesome stuff with helping revitalize the Iron Mountain area. So I'm going to just let them tell you about it. So we're going to just jump right into this. So without further ado, let's chat it up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with a couple of good friends of mine, Megan and Kyle Blomquist. Megan and Kyle, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're breaking new ground here. Not only is this the first time I'm interviewing two people at once, but it's also the first couple that I'm interviewing on the podcast. So like I said, we're breaking new ground here. Kyle, now you and we've known each other for a long time, and you grew up here in Iron Mountain. But Megan, you're actually from Illinois, right?
Yes, Rockford, Illinois.
Rockford, Illinois, okay. So you're from Illinois, Kyle's from Iron Mountain. Where did you two lovebirds meet?
We met at architecture school in Milwaukee, actually.
Okay.
In 2008-ish.
All right.
We were in a design studio together, and we just kind of started hanging out and never stopped hanging out.
So you mentioned architecture school in Milwaukee. So you were both there, studying architecture. Kyle, you went to Grand Valley first for a while, correct?
Yep. Yeah, I went to Grand Valley. When you're coming out of school, when you're coming out of high school, you don't have it all mapped out.
Sure.
You certainly don't know anything in terms of credits transferring and all that stuff. So it just kind of seemed, well, I'll go to Grand Valley where I knew more people that were going there. And my plan was, hey, I'll have those cheap credits and then I'll transfer to another architecture school. The other architecture school ended up being UW-Milwaukee. And it was a circuitous route, which
Sure.
if I had it to do again and there was no wife and children and other things involved, it was probably not the most efficient route, but yeah.
Well, life is always a journey. You kind of figure it out along the way. I guess this question is for both of you guys. What made you pursue architecture? What made you kind of follow that path?
You go first.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I was always just drawing buildings. I was always trying to redesign my parents' house. My grandparents had a cottage in upstate New York, and I just remember going there one summer with them and picking out wallpaper colors and telling them how I was gonna redesign the kitchen and and they were like, oh yeah, okay, whatever, it's like 100-year-old cottage in the woods. But I was just always trying to change the spaces that I was in and sketch up ideas for buildings. And my mom just one day was like, hey, you should look at architecture. I'm like, I don't know anything about that, but okay. And it just stuck. That was what I pursued coming out of high school, and I was always satisfied with that. So.
Did you play The Sims? Were you a big Sims fan?
I only played The Sims so that I could build houses.
Perfect,
I didn't care about anything else involved in The Sims. But yeah, I totally did.
Not even the gibberish language.
No, I just built houses and then I would close out of it and start over. That's all I would do. Yeah,
what about you, Kyle?
Mine's obviously it's a little bit more. It's more obvious. Is obviously the family business. My grandpa started our firm back in 1960. My dad came around in the 1980s, and they all tried to talk me out of it just because of what's involved with being an architect. The arduous nature of the education process, the apprenticeship process, the process of getting licensed, and then once you go through all of that, it's a pretty tough profession, especially when you're a business owner yourself. You end up wearing 17 hats.
Sure.
And sometimes the work starts to bleed into the early hours of the morning, the late hours of the evening, the weekends, and that sort of thing. And I think that they tried their best to kind of dissuade me from it, but I did have an interest, and whenever anybody's going to tell me no, I'm going to probably go the opposite direction too.
Uh-huh.
Sure. So, in the middle of your studies, one of the cool things that I'd like to talk a little bit about with you, Megan, is that you actually got to study in Paris for a while. Can you touch on that experience a little bit?
Yep. So I think it was my junior year of my undergrad. There's an annual program where a good-sized group of students goes abroad, and I joined that program, and I spent 2.5 months roughly, stationed in Paris, and then we traveled to Rome and Venice and London and a number of other Florence, a number of other places, and just kind of spent a summer roaming around Europe, learning from the great buildings over there, and just kind of, yeah.
Was it all education?
It really was. We had classes that we had to attend, but a lot of it was just kind of urban exploration and just soaking in, really genuine pieces of architecture that have been standing for a long time, and that's the best place to learn from. So there's a lot of personal growth. It was very independent.
Sure.
Study in many ways, but we had a professor that was with us over there, and we got into a lot of places that you don't get to see when you just kind of vacation there, as an individual. Yeah. So we had access to, a monastery that we got to stay at and kind of study and diagram and just sort of experience for a 24-hour period that way of life, and how the building was designed. And so it was just really interesting to see some of those places from that perspective instead of just from a vacationing perspective. But yeah,
I assume one of those places was Notre Dame. obviously, with the the recent fire and.
Yeah, that's super unfortunate. I've been there twice actually.
Oh, okay.
2009, I went to Paris and London for a little while in high school, and then so in 2009. I'm sorry, 2006. I went for the first time. In 2009 is when I studied there. But yeah, so I've been there twice, and to see that happen was really very sad.
Sure.
It's a really, really cool place.
So to fast forward just a little bit, so you guys finish up school. I mean, I know you both got your master's degrees, but now it's like, okay, school's done. It's probably like decision time.
Yeah.
So how did you come to the decision to come to Iron Mountain, back to the Upper Peninsula? Because I mean, let's be honest, you both have pretty impressive resumes, and not that other people in Iron Mountain don't. But really, at that point, the world was kind of your oyster. You really could kind of go anywhere you want. What really brought you back to Iron Mountain?
I think, we loved Milwaukee. It was an awesome city to learn, what we do in. We had some amazing professors to learn from. A lot of them were practicing architects at various firms throughout the city. And, I think we had some really good prospects for positions to remain in the city. Mm-hmm. But we saw Iron Mountain and this firm as a ship that we could steer, I think.
Sure.
Whereas when you're in a larger city and you're a new hire at a firm, rightfully so, you have to earn your way through that. And so you spend a lot of your early years kind of doing nitty-gritty work. Whereas, we knew if we came here that we would kind of be thrust into assuming greater responsibility over projects, and it really forces you to learn quickly how to do this job from every perspective.
Sure.
Instead of just drawing bathroom details or stair details at a really large firm in a big city. Mm-hmm. And I think also this community, I think we knew we could have a really greater impact in a small community. In a big city, you might have a lesser impact with every move you make. So we wanted to come somewhere that we could shape and help be a part of the improvement. And I think that's what the potential we saw here, at least from my perspective.
No, I think that you nailed it. And if I add too much, I'm just going to get redundant. But yeah, it's definitely, like Meg said, it's a ship that we could steer. I think that we saw the opportunity within a market that was not necessarily soft, but it's a very difficult market to work. But there are opportunities up here.
Sure.
The opportunity to be more of a general practitioner of architecture, where there's a lot of specialization when you're working in larger markets. So you'll be with a firm that does a lot of education work. You'll be with another firm that does a lot of office high-rise work, and you're coming into a much larger team, and so your role becomes very focused on interiors, or becomes focused on structure or systems or something like that, where here when we take on a project, when it walks in the door, you're working with myself, Megan, or my father, and we're taking that project start to finish through all of the different divisions of the work. And so we're also working on larger projects and smaller projects. We'll work on private residences, and we'll work on, say, the Bay College Library Edition, projects like that. And so it definitely gives us a much wider range of access.
Sure.
In terms of the breadth of projects.
I think it allows us to sharpen our skill set in so many ways too. We're not focusing on one building type, endlessly throughout our career. We're really fortunate that we get to design so many different building types. And we bring with us, I think, a sense of style and a style of practice from the people that we learned from in Milwaukee.
Sure.
So I think sometimes we run into people up here that feel like they have to leave Iron Mountain or leave the UP to find a really great designer or a really great architect. And I think what we try to let people know is that we've brought that with us from Milwaukee. We hope that we carry, a sense of design style that people are really seeking in this sort of contemporary world that we live in. And so we do offer that in, rural rural Upper Peninsula.
Right.
So we bring kind of a city style, a very urban feel to everything that we design, but we're also very mindful of classical architectural styles and techniques. And so yeah, I think we try to be very well-rounded because we have to be when you're in the UP.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
You mentioned rural Upper Peninsula. I mean, I know you had been up here to visit, obviously, before you guys truly moved here. But when you moved here, was there any culture shock for you?
Gosh.
I mean, I know Kyle, obviously, he's from here, so it's like old hat for him. But was there any instances where you're like, oh, this is new to me?
We've lived here 7 years now, and I think it's probably taken me 5 of those years to really just accept. This is where I live now. It was a tough transition when you come from, Milwaukee's not a huge city. It's not Chicago or LA, but it's a bigger city. And so that was a tough transition to make. You have places to dine out and places to be social that are easily accessible in those cities. You have great buildings to look at, styles to absorb, and you come here and, in many ways it's a blank slate. This community is, on the I think, upside of where it went during the economy's tough times.
Sure.
And so we're fortunate to start to see some of those things come back here, places to socialize and dine, and so that's great. But it was a transition, and to make. And
well,
I think maybe the biggest thing that I noticed just from a practicing perspective is that there's a really strong DIY mentality with a lot of our clients up here.
Sure.
A lot of people are in the building trade in this market. It's just it's part of what people do. There's a lot of contractors. There's a lot of handymen, and so I think a lot of people feel like, well, I can knock this out myself. I don't need the advice of a professional.
Sure.
And so we run into that a lot in our projects. Like, well, I'm just going to DIY this portion of my home, and you kind of have to help your clients through that if that's really what they want to do, or advise them, against it when you know that perhaps they're not equipped for that, or there's a better, more cost-effective way through it. So just that piece alone, everybody up here is very fiercely independent and very DIY oriented, and it's great. That's awesome. But it sometimes comes into our projects, and we just have to manage
I think that no matter where you practice, depending on the client, is that architecture or the practice of architecture and design is such that everybody has that in authorship issue at some point.
Sure.
At some point, somebody, even if the client trusts you completely, at some point they're going to come up with some kind of idea or do something that is going to really shift the balance in a project. What we try to do is try to work with clients on a collaborative level. When it becomes difficult, like Megan was describing, is when it gets to be, well, here, hand me the pen and I'll do it, sort of thing. And at that point, it undermines what we're providing as a service.
Sure.
And so that's probably part of what you're talking about. But the other thing about, getting back to when we first moved up here and the transition of the culture shock, I think it also had so much to do with the almost anticlimactic nature of graduating.
Right.
You graduate from architecture school, you go through your thesis, and you're done. Awesome. And then you roll directly into the profession, which is equally, if not more so, demanding. And so instead of this being you roll down slide down the brontosaurus's back and you're done sort of thing, it was starting to ramp up. And so what happens is you get invested in building this business back up and making it your own, and sometimes your social life drops off. Sometimes you end up extremely isolated, and I think that was part of it, and still kind of is sometimes.
Sure.
But
you mentioned your thesis a little bit, and I do remember just from our conversations, from being friends outside of doing this podcast, that your thesis was a lot about focusing on the city of Detroit and repurposing basically blighted areas, so to speak, and making use and function of existing structures while also, kind of repurposing. in a lot of ways, I almost see that being able to correlating that to a lot of cities in the Upper Peninsula. I mean, as much as we love this place, if you look around a lot of the towns, there's a lot of blight, there's a lot of buildings that are just sitting there withering away.
Right.
I mean, do you kind of see that being something that you could kind of translate to the Upper Peninsula?
There's definitely an aspect of that, that everything has potential, and there are monies or resources that can be devoted in one way or the other to either pull yourself out of that or work in the other direction.
Sure.
I think that what we try to do is in Dickinson County in particular, there is a lot of great employers, so there's good jobs out there. I think that the community is really coming back around in terms of the cohesiveness of the downtown. We're starting to fill vacancy there.
Sure.
But there is still a housing shortage,
Mm-hmm.
and the tendency is, or tends to be, that let's start building houses and doing this speculative development out in the township, something
Sure.
like that. And whether people believe it or not, or feel that it's appropriate when used in a community our size, there is a sprawl factor.
Sure.
Whether it be how we develop box stores on the periphery rather than working in the downtown, as well as starting these multi-acre developments out in the township or out in the rural areas of Dickinson County, rather than building into our existing neighborhoods or reinvesting in our existing neighborhoods here.
Sure.
So you look at even, say, the west side of Iron Mountain, there's a tremendous potential to take some of these blighted properties, have some investment, and start to build up that neighborhood into a functioning, tight community like it used to be.
Sure.
And you can kind of apply that to various different neighborhoods, basically filling in the gaps,
Yeah.
and creating something that's a little bit more cohesive and clear. And in doing that, that's going to bring up the value in everybody's properties, rather than continuing to basically add to supply on these homes that 10 years from now people are going to go, yeah, it's dated, I don't like it, and the seller is.
And your dollar goes so much further in most renovation scenarios.
Sure.
Anyways.
Yeah.
So, we don't like to turn clients down when they walk in and they say, I've got a decent budget, I want to build a new home. But we know what new construction costs and we know what renovation roughly costs. And so
Sure.
most of the time, we try to at least rule that out as an option with our clients, to look at kind of fixer-uppers as like a great possible scenario to basically have a new house by the time
Sure.
you're done, but also provide that reinvestment in those existing neighborhoods that really need a lot of TLC, especially in our community.
Yeah.
And I think that's how Kyle's thesis really kind of comes with us to where we are now in Dickinson County, because it was really about reinvestment in neighborhoods and revitalization of neighborhoods that have been deteriorating for a long time. So we see that here, we see it everywhere. Every community has it. So.
Sure.
I think the one other thing that my thesis has kind of come back around in recent years is the question of low-income housing in Dickinson County. There is a need, and sometimes when proposals are out there, there's an ugly side sometimes in terms of the prejudice towards the assumptions that are laid at the feet of people in that income bracket.
Absolutely.
And instead of referring to those people as working class individuals who have kids, have students within the public school system, have jobs within our community, fill important roles within our community, we always refer to them as the other,
Not
and
we.
them
I mean.
people. No, we, but there's a greater tendency within the community to be obstructive to development in low-income housing.
Yeah, I would agree
because
completely.
of prejudice.
And it's
so-
unfortunate because whether or not we like to admit it locally, there's a great need for that. And low income, quote unquote, is a really broad spectrum. That's a single parent working a job.
Sure.
That has that's not something to be critical of. It's
Right.
not something to judge or to, put a bad name to. So we have to supply housing for that. And, whether it's in the form of new development or repurposing of, old school buildings within our
Sure.
community. That was a recent example. Or just reinvestment in good rental properties in some of these older neighborhoods. That's how we supply that housing for those working families that just happen to fall into that income bracket. And those are the issues that Kyle tackled in his thesis, and that we really try to continue being passionate about in our work here, and we're always supportive of those type of development initiatives. So
you definitely are, and that's a good segue into the next couple of things that I wanted to talk about with you guys, because the theme of community keeps coming up, and you guys aren't just talking the talk, you're really walking the walk. Megan, I wanted to just touch a little bit on the work that you've done for Iron Mountain's Downtown Development Authority. Can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so in 2013 maybe, I joined the Downtown Development Authority just as a board member. And I just remember the first meeting I went to, I had this piece of paper with a list of everything that I wanted to accomplish. I was just so fired up about being a part of helping our downtown kind of come back to life. And I don't even know where that list is or how many things on it I've actually gotten to accomplish. But several years later, I was fortunate enough to be nominated for the chairperson position of that board, and so that's what I currently hold that position. And that board and that organization has grown tremendously, even since I've started, and not at all because of me, but just because of the really awesome people that make up that board and the City of Iron Mountain support. So we've hired Paula Craven, who's our program director, Amber Pipp, who's our event coordinator, and those two have just been absolute rock stars in transforming our events that happen downtown, and being passionate about revitalization of historic buildings and bolstering our grant programs that offer pretty sizable sums of money to building owners who want to invest in historic properties downtown. And really, I've just kind of been there as a support for those things, and
Sure.
I try to infuse my knowledge of mostly, buildings and infrastructure and historic preservation wherever I can. But that's just kind of been my role, is more the bricks and mortar side of things in the downtown, and it's what I'm passionate about. And I obviously want to see our downtown come back to life, and that happens through filling vacancy and restoring historic properties. So.
Well, I think you can, at least from my perspective, from an outsider, well, now I'm not an outsider because I'm back here, but yeah, now I'm an insider, but you can see the tangible results of that. You haven't hit the finish line, obviously, but there's legit, you can look around downtown Iron Mountain and truly see tangible results to what you guys have been doing, which I think is awesome.
We've been fortunate to have been involved in a number of the downtown projects that have happened in the last several years. So we really love, I think personally, I have a great passion for historic properties, so historic buildings.
Sure.
I think we really enjoy that type of project. It's nitty-gritty work, and you have to understand how old buildings were put together and how they were designed. But we really love those types of projects and supporting them through grant processes and state funding and all of that. So there's just a lot of potential. Yeah.
Now, Kyle, your involvement of kind of walking the walk, so to speak, has been involvement with the Iron Mountain City Council, correct? Mm-hmm. What year did you join the City Council?
Oh, it was over 4 years ago now. I think it was back in, must have been 2000. I think it was 14. It might have been 15. And at the time, there was a vacancy that was caused by a board member stepping down, and
sure.
So when I first came on the council, it was on basically a letter of interest and appointed. And then several months later, I had to fill that through election. And so that's always a fun process. We're going through it right now. But, I think that the trap that people get stuck in is there can tend to be a negative spin on just about anything within the community. And if it's something that you're not certain of, there's an unfortunate tendency to assume the worst.
Sure.
And I think that when we first came back, you're always kind of looking at areas where you could contribute, but you're also looking at deficiencies within the community. Now, I probably identified the city council at the time, the way it was built up, as one of those deficiencies. Fair or unfair, it
Right.
just that was the perception. And so Megan and I actually started for probably about 6 to 9 months prior to my even signing a letter of interest to fill a vacancy. We started going to council meetings just to see what was going on, see what kind of things that they were actually touching on. And I think you'll find that the majority of the stuff tends to be really boring maintenance stuff,
Sure.
punctuated by the odd issue that forces the council members to take a position in the future interest of Iron Mountain and its future citizens, as well as its current citizens. And I think that what I've tried to do as much as anything is represent people who might feel either that they're not represented or not represented to the extent that they would like to be within city government. I think that there is a general, our generation can sometimes be accused of being apathetic or disengaged from these processes. I think a lot of the times it's because they feel like they're excluded from those processes.
Sure.
And so I've tried to kind of fill in what I feel is a younger perspective,
Yeah.
a more urban perspective sometimes, perhaps a more progressive perspective. And so when the odd, interesting item does pop up in terms of zoning, in terms of development within the city of Iron Mountain, questions like, do we provide a payment in lieu of taxes agreement for this developer who wants to come in and buy Central School and turn it into low-income housing?
Yeah.
When we're looking at, currently what we're looking at is medical marijuana opting in there with the eventual transition at some point to recreational. How do you tread lightly with some of the older members of the community while also showing the younger members of the community, as well as people who might be looking to relocate to Iron Mountain to fill some of these jobs, show them that you have what they need and what they want, and that you're creating an environment that they would like to raise their families in.
Sure.
And so that's what I've tried to do. But I'm just one member, just like Meg said, you know, nothing happens in the city of Iron Mountain because of Kyle Blomquist. Nothing happens in the city of Iron Mountain because of Megan Blomquist. We're just doing a very small part of a bigger thing. I think it's just more of a cultural shift right now.
Sure.
The DDA board is getting younger. The sensibilities in terms of where to devote time within the DDA has changed significantly. Events are still very important because they're part of the culture. They're also an important fundraising mechanism, but the reason why that fundraising mechanism exists is for the development aspect.
Sure.
The marketing, the contributions to local entrepreneurs.
The grants
and even
that we provide, yeah.
right, and even on the, you know, from an architectural perspective with the firm, oftentimes we will get almost undue credit for what we do or the projects that we participate in. While we, you know, pride ourselves in the way that we design and the way that we approach projects, then that ultimately, you know, comes out in the wash and ends up in the end product. It really is our clients and the entrepreneurs who are making that investment.
Sure.
We're getting paid to do our part of the job.
Right.
The contractor's getting paid to do their part of the job. The city of Iron Mountain, through one means or another, is growing their tax base.
Yeah.
So that's important to get roads fixed and do other fun stuff.
Right.
But it really is the local business owner who is taking the leap of faith in putting a lot of stock in what we're doing in the downtown, enough so to say, I'm going to move my business to the downtown. I'm going to have a sizable investment in bringing a blighted property around in the downtown.
It's been awesome in the last couple of years. I mean, we have Erickson Jewelers, we have Organic Grounds Coffee House, and, you know, countless other people that
Sure.
are really wanting to be a part of the movement that's happening within
Right.
the downtown district, and it's so exciting. And every time we hear, negativity, like, oh, this town's got nothing going for it, why would I stay here? I feel like those people they don't have their eyes as open as they possibly could be.
Right.
There's so much happening, and
Yeah.
there's so much on the cusp of happening. It's just really exciting to get to be a part of it, and I hope people start to take notice, because there's nothing, not nothing but positivity, but there's certainly more positive things going on in this community than negative things.
I would agree. And I feel like both of you end up in not a catch-22, but almost kind of a double-edged sword type of a position where the older generation might say, well, the younger generation doesn't get involved with anything because they don't care. But then you step in and you get involved, and the first time you speak up and try to do stuff, the first response is, well, you're so young, you don't know what you're talking about anyways. So it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, in a way. Would you say that that's valid?
I think so. I think that there's so much. It's just and I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it's this whole idea that, for instance, everybody looks at their phone throughout the course of a day.
Sure.
Old, young, no matter what. But it's the millennials that are put on the hook for looking at their phone all the time, right? It's the exact same in terms of positivity, negativity, contributing or not contributing with
Sure.
regard to millennials. Every single generation is guilty of some degree of apathy, as well as they should get credit for some degree of participation. But there is definitely the number of times that we all, anybody from who's 25 to 35 in that kind of generation, everybody at some point has had to play the count birthdays game.
Sure.
You're approached with the argument that not that you're wrong because of X, Y, or Z. You're wrong because you can't possibly be right. You're too young to be right.
Yeah.
And that's a really tough place to start.
I think when it comes to community revitalization, though, youthful enthusiasm has a lot of value. When you get young people fired up to come into a downtown environment, they're moving back home from a big city, they've got a good job, they make good money, and they're ready to reinvest, you should never stand in the way of those people, because they may not know everything about development, they may not have all the answers or all the experience behind them, but when they're motivated, they can get awesome things done.
Sure.
And so there are programs in place at the state level and at the local level to financially incentivize projects, and it doesn't matter how old you are. If you've got the means to make it happen, that's what Kyle and I really are trying to support, is just make sure you have the funding in place to get these things done. We help with that, state funding for grants, facade improvement programs. We utilize our service to create visuals that get community support for a project, that can get financial backing from a bank where otherwise it might be kind of skeptical. So I think we just try to be supportive of any and any. Oh my gosh. Any project, let's just stop there, of any project that comes forward until it proves itself to be not viable. I mean, like Kyle said, it's the entrepreneurs and the owners themselves that are really making the great strides, and we're just here to be their support system.
No. So to shift gears a little bit, I want to kind of focus back a little bit on the work that you're doing here with your architecture firm. What's it like working with your spouse? Amazing.
In our old office, we actually had a wall between our workspaces, so we had our own private space.
Okay.
When we moved here, it was like, oh, we'll just do a nice big open environment. It's collaborative. It's free flowing. Now we don't have that wall between us, so it's it's fine.
No, it really is. It really is. It works out pretty darn good. I mean, Megan and I have a relationship whereby we're not pulling any punches anyway.
Sure.
So we might as well be in the same room.
Yeah.
To take the blow. And so, yeah, no, it's always been very productive and constructive in terms of how we work together. The way that we work together is extremely collaborative. It's pretty seamless in terms of the transition of ideas and the development and refinement of ideas between Megan and I. And it really, there's projects that are Kyle projects, there's projects that are Megan projects, but at some point the other weighs in on it and has a pretty vital role in making sure that ideas are vet properly and that they get to the client in some kind of better than they start a lot of the time.
Right. Well, in the end, and then throw another kind of curveball into it, and then you have your father here as well. So I mean, it's like then you've got the like dad hat over here, you know. So that's an interesting dynamic.
It keeps things real honest. You know, there's no sugarcoating anything.
Sure.
When somebody's got an idea and someone else is skeptical about it, you know, we just try to be honest about our opinions in projects, and I think that's how you get the most pure result. From a design perspective and technical perspective. So we're all just there to help support one another and provide honest criticism, constructively honest criticism.
The one tough thing that I think that anybody who's working in a family-run business would probably agree is that at some point they're not your dad anymore. They're not your wife anymore. They're your coworker.
Sure.
You're mutually responsible to one another and accountable to one another. And at some point, that can sometimes, not cheapen that familial relationship, but definitely change it.
Sure.
And so there's definitely times when her and I just can't turn it off when we leave the office, and it's 9 o'clock at night and we're still there working, and so we'll figure that out one day. But then same thing with working with my father is you have a great relationship, but I don't call him up to say, hey Dad, what'd you do this weekend? I call him up to say, hey, what's going on with this project or that project? Hey, are we closing the loop on this thing or that thing? And so,
but I don't think any of us would have it any other way.
No.
Kyle and I came through school. We lived together throughout grad school. We had separate thesis projects, but we were like one another's little own design studio, essentially, in terms of providing feedback and critiques on what we were doing. So we learned how to work together throughout school. And so now, if I had to go work somewhere else and Kyle wasn't there, I don't know what I would do. I mean,
where do you guys keep your Kyle?
Where do you keep your Kyle in this office building? So I need some of his resources. No, I mean, Kyle's got his skill set. I have my skill set. We have overlapping skill sets. But, we really rely on one another for our various areas of expertise and passion to really pull a project together.
Sure.
So I wouldn't have it any other way.
No, I agree with that.
Well, and then to throw in even another kind of curveball on top of that, then you guys are parents to twins.
Right.
So, I mean, how does that kind of, how do you juggle all of it? Don't juggle?
We don't.
Okay. No.
It's just it's just a circus. Yeah. We have 10-month-old twins, identical boys. They're like the coolest part about our life right now. They're also a lot of work.
Yeah. I think there was this picture, because we've always, Bogart's sitting on Megan's lap right now. We've always brought the dog to the office. And so the thought when we first got pregnant was,
he says we.
We.
Me.
I was there. But when she got pregnant and I was there, the first thought was, all right, we'll bring the baby to the office. We'll wear the baby. We'll take turns wearing the baby, and we'll work.
Yeah.
And then that second baby came into the equation, it was like, not that the first way would have worked, but it definitely wasn't going to work now. And so we've done what we can to.
It really is a juggling act. I spent 7 months, the first 7 months at home with them. And I was working,
Right.
borderline full-time hours, but I was doing that after they went to bed in the evening until whatever time I got my work done. And, Kyle wakes up at 2 in the morning to kind of get his day jump-started before the boys wake up. And we have a really wonderful nanny who now comes 2 days a week. And Kyle will stay home 1 day a week, and I'll stay home 2 days a week. And so it's really just like we stitch together a 5-day work week by hook or by crook.
Right.
We get it done. I mean, you just have to hustle until it all gets done, and that's kind of the mode we're in until they go to school or college or whatever. We get it done, though.
Yeah. At some point.
So we're sitting here in your beautiful office space, and you've got around on the walls here, just to kind of paint the picture for everybody listening in, some of the projects that I'm assuming these are projects you guys have actually worked on. These aren't just specs.
Yeah.
So what have been some of your favorite projects then, or interesting projects that you guys have kind of done together that you really are kind of proud of?
I really enjoyed working on 51st State Brewery.
Yeah, I was just looking at that one.
That was a really a new building type for us with an immense learning curve just in terms of building systems.
Sure.
Everybody sees the pretty side of what we do, which is these cool drawings and our renderings, but behind that is a really technical aspect of what we do, which is building systems, structural systems, construction documentation, and construction itself. And it was a small building, but it was a very technical building. We had to learn a lot about how brewing beer works, which was really cool. And
Sure.
we developed a really nice relationship with that owner. And that was just a cool project I enjoyed a lot. So.
Projects have, we have a soft spot for a lot of projects for different reasons. Like Meg just explained with the brewery, you're learning something new with a different place type. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we worked on the Bay College project, their Academic Success Center and their library edition, mm-hmm. that was a really rewarding process because there was a particular buy-in from the client in terms of our process.
Okay.
And so our process is heavy into the programming phase of the project, where we don't go in with any assumptions in terms of what they need. We try to boil it down to the lowest common denominator so that we can kind of surpass expectations by changing the project in one way or the other in terms of how the client might be thinking of it when we're first brought on board. That project in particular was such that they had a very small academic success center and tutoring center within their existing facilities.
It was almost like an office suite.
Right. It
Okay.
was very, very small, and it was kind of cloistered away. It was behind closed doors. It was very inaccessible.
Okay.
Those facilities were also serving, the first person that is going to college mm-hmm. in your family, people who are might come from a low-income background, might come from, maybe they have some
academic struggles,
whether it be that they're on the autism spectrum or any number of challenges. And so this was really a facility meant to accommodate the entirety of Bay College's population, and it was kind of cloistered away. And so when we were first brought on board, it was, how do we add in this kind of localized position to the building to get everything we need out of this. And as we went through the programming phase, a picture started to kind of develop in our mind, and we looked at a non-scope area being their library. It was this rotundal area on mm-hmm. Bay College's Escanaba campus, and it was libraries, which meant that the stacks were fanning out in this inefficient manner.
Sure.
And so they had all this square footage that was wrapped up in this inefficiency. And we looked at it and we said, if you structured your tutoring center in that area and layered it like an onion, where you had collaborative spaces in the center, you had the tutoring offices kind of in the next band outward, and then you had a more private band along that perimeter, you can divide those functions without putting up too many barriers, and you can create a much more functional space. So what we're really doing is we're renovating your library into a tutoring center, and we're adding a library.
Sure.
We changed the nature of that project significantly from what was in their head, at the outset. We didn't change the budget of that project necessarily all that much, but we just looked at it from a different perspective, and I think we really enjoy really rich projects like that we learn a lot from. We learned how to design a library efficiently when a library wasn't part of that project to begin with. It was just a very culturally rich project. Mm-hmm. We love projects when the owners are supportive of our ideas, that we develop really great relationships with the owners, and Bay College is a wonderful client of ours that we enjoy working with so very much, and we learned a lot about how they handle their students, how they teach their students, the teaching environments that are all different across their campus. It was just a really cool, really enjoyable project to be a part of.
And ultimately, the population that you're serving in a project is an important piece of it as well. Mm-hmm. So you're always proud when you have created a space that is more inclusive. Mm-hmm. It's serving the underserved, and I think that project checks a lot of those boxes as well.
Yeah, and when your clients come back and they're 100% happy with the job you've done, that's the most rewarding thing ever. And so that was a really awesome project.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have checked off every single box I had, and I had a lot of them. We definitely have touched on a lot of different stuff, which I'm not mad about. Is there anything that you feel like that I missed, or that you'd want to touch on? I mean, nothing says you have to, but now is your time. If there's anything else that you want to kind of put out there to the masses.
Is there a soapbox? Do you have a soapbox?
Do I have a soapbox? I looked up my favorite quote, and I just wanted to read it because I never get it right if I just say it on my own. But it kind of goes back to the whole investment in your community and the older generation versus the new generation.
Sure.
And it is, a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know that they shall never sit in.
That is a very good quote. I like that.
So
Thank you for sharing it.
That's kind of how I look at the city and various perspectives
and what you're doing.
People.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's my soapbox.
That's your soapbox?
Right.
Okay.
Got it.
Way to go.
Well, if you've listened to the podcast, you know that what the final question always is. So how do you like your pasty? Do you like it with ketchup, nothing on it? Do you put something interesting on it? Gravy?
I like it with rutabaga, and I do like ketchup.
Ketchup? Okay.
I know some people think that's sacrilegious.
Sacrilegious, right?
But honestly, piping hot pasty with a little bit of cold ketchup on it kind of does it for me.
And you guys are in walking distance of Antonio's. That's pretty dangerous because I really like their pasties.
Gene K's
isn't far away.
Yeah.
You're gonna hate me. I'm not a huge pasty fan. I think it just because I didn't grow up here.
Well, yeah, it's meat and potatoes.
It's meat and potatoes. No, but I will eat a pasty, and I do enjoy ketchup on it. We'll just leave it at that.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, I can't thank you guys enough for coming on the podcast. It's always a lot more helpful when you kind of know somebody, which obviously I've known you guys for a while, but this has been a really great chat, so thank you both for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, it's time for the takeaways from my chat with Kyle and Megan. The first is the idea of reinvesting in our communities. I would say in nearly every community in the UP, there are buildings and neighborhoods that have certainly seen better days. And it would be really easy to say just bulldoze it down and start fresh. But I love that Kyle and Megan are big proponents of renovating and repurposing when at all possible in the work that they're doing. The UP is steeped in so much history, so anytime we can keep parts of it, honor it, and grow from it, I think that that's a total win-win situation. My second takeaway from my chat with them is stepping up and being a part of the solution. You know, it's very easy to have ideas about what's wrong with our communities and focusing on the bad. It's also just as easy to have ideas about the ways that our communities can thrive and be better. But it's a completely different thing to actually step in and take action that will make those things happen. And with Megan and Kyle, I mean, they're just a prime example of what can happen when you step up. You know, from their architecture work with, buildings and places around our community, to Megan's work with the DDA and making downtown Iron Mountain great again, and Kyle's work on the city council. It's just prime examples of doing what it takes to make our community a better place for everyone. And it's going to take people with enthusiasm and fresh ideas to propel all of our towns and cities forward. So my challenge for you all this week is step up. Whatever your strengths are, use them in a way to get involved that will benefit your community. Because if we all do that, just imagine the possibilities. Chat It Up is a bi-weekly podcast about all things Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and leave me a review. You can also find Chat It Up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for listening in. I'm your host, Shooter, reminding you to keep your chin up and your eyes forward.